I will begin with an introduction of Issue 2. This is the Ohio Drug Price Relief Act. Issue 2 would limit the amount the state and state agencies could pay for prescription drugs. This act is designed to restrict the amount that any state agency could pay for drugs, tying it to the price paid by the Veterans Administration. The VA negotiates drug prices with companies and typically pays 20 to 24% less than other agencies for prescription drugs. Specifically, it would forbid state agencies to enter into any purchasing agreement with drug manufacturers unless the net cost of the drug is the same or less than that paid by the VA. State agencies would not be allowed to pay more than the Veterans Administration pays for a particular medication. These state agencies include, but are not limited to, the Ohio Department of Aging, the Ohio Department of Health, the Ohio Department of Insurance, the Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services, and the Ohio Department of Medicaid, the program for people with low incomes or disabilities. The bill would only impact those who receive drugs paid for by the state, not those with any other type of coverage. If adopted, the proposed statute would affect only those associated with the above-mentioned state agencies, roughly 4 million Ohioans. The act would not apply to those who use private insurance, Medicare, or other non-state provided coverage, approximately 7 million Ohioans. Our speakers today include Dr. Robert Lewis Ruff and Mr. Dale Butland. Robert Lewis Ruff, MD, PhD, is the retired, since 2014, National Director for Neurology of the Veterans Health Administration. He served as the Acting Director for the Rehabilitation Research and Development Service of the Office of Research and Development within the Department of Veterans Affairs for several years. He received his MD and PhD degrees from the University of Washington in 1976. For over 30 years, he worked for the VHA in Cleveland and Washington, D.C., as well as for Case Western Reserve University, and focused neurorehabilitation. He developed national care networks for epilepsy and ALS in VHA, and built up recovery of motor function after stroke, recovery following traumatic brain injury, and the use of brain-computer interface technology to improve communication ability for individuals with impaired motor skills. He was a member of the NICHD Advisory Council, which oversees the NIH Medical Rehabilitation Research Program, and he was a member of the NINDS Advisory Council, which oversees research related to disorders of the nervous system, neurology, and neuroscience. He writes a monthly list of important articles on TBI for the American Society for Neurorehabilitation and is a past member of the ASNR Board of Directors. His academic rank is Professor Emeritus with tenure of Neurology and Neurosciences at Case Western Reserve University. He is also a member of the Board of Directors and past chair of the Medical Scientific Advisory Board of the Myasthenia Gravis Foundation of America, a non-paid volunteer. And, oops. Speaking for the no side on issue 2 is Dale Butland. Dale Butland has 35 years of professional experience in politics, government, and communications. For nearly 2 decades, he worked for the late U.S. Senator and astronaut John Glenn in a variety of capacities, including press secretary and Ohio Chief of Staff. For the past 16 years, Dale has operated his own strategic communications consulting firm, Butland and Associates, whose clients have included a wide range of corporations, labor unions, nonprofit organizations, and political candidates. Now living in Columbus, Ohio, he is a regular panelist on 3 network-affiliated public affairs TV shows and frequent op-ed contributor to many Ohio and national newspapers. In December, his poignant remembrance of Senator Glenn, the last American hero, was published by the New York Times. The schedule for Discussion of this issue will be about 6 minutes pro, 6 minutes con, 3 minutes pro rebuttal, 3 minutes con rebuttal, and then we will have about 15 minutes again for audience questions. So if you are anticipating having some questions and you don't have a card, make sure people know that you would like to do this, and we will begin.
Thank you. I'm going to stand just when this comes up. As was said, I'm the retired head of neurology for the VA. I've worked for the VA for 30 years, and I know how the VA works. And I also want to make a point. I'm not being paid for this. I don't think that health care really is something that people should make excessive amounts of money on. As was stated, the Ballot 2 is really a simple initiative. It states that the state of Ohio will not pay more than the VA pays for drugs. VA is the largest healthcare organization in the country that is allowed to negotiate with pharma for prices. So when the VA negotiates for prices, it does so on a nationwide basis. So there's a spreadsheet that's printed that lists all of the drugs, and I asked the people at Case and people at Ohio State, how does this compare to your formulary? Because the VA doesn't deal with obstetrics and it doesn't deal with children. And they said that 95% of the drugs are covered by the VA list. The drugs that aren't covered would be dealt with the same way they were dealt with before, negotiated on an individual basis. Now, one of the points is that, so this drug really covers Medicaid, the people involved in the prison systems, state employees, and an AIDS drug assistance program that's sponsored by the state of Ohio. It does not deal with, as was mentioned, people who are on Medicare, such as myself. It doesn't deal with veterans. Veterans are not mentioned specifically in it. Nor does it deal with the elderly. Nor does it deal with you going to the drugstore and filling an individual prescription. It's not covered by that. So why should anybody be interested if you're not directly impacted by this? And the reason that I think it helps the entire state is that by lowering how much the state of Ohio has to pay for medication, that enables Ohio to operate with a lower operating budget, so you pay less taxes. The other real reason is that I don't think in my lifetime, I don't think, unfortunately, even there are many younger people in this room than I don't think in your lifetime that Congress is going to pass legislation to get a hold on drug pricing. It is entirely out of control. Drug companies can charge whatever the devil they want, and it has continued to escalate. A member of the Senate, the Republican lead in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, said that he didn't want a Western European healthcare system for the United States. And I don't know that the United States is ever going to adopt anything like Europe. But it's really not Europe, it's the whole rest of the world. We are the only country, basically, that operates with this multi-payer system. And it is a system that is full of leeches. There are so many middlemen in the system that I don't even know what drug pricing is. When I recommended drugs and medication for a person that they were not covered for it by the VA, they could call 20 pharmacies and get 20 different prices. That doesn't make any sense. But the real problem with medication is that it's not a free market system. It doesn't work that way because you don't have a choice. Thank you. If I want to buy a car, I can buy whatever the devil I want. If I don't like Chevy, I can go to Ford. If I don't like Ford, I can go to Toyota. If I don't like them, I can ride public transportation. But if I have multiple sclerosis, I don't have a choice. I either get medication to treat, to reduce the frequency of attacks, or I suffer. I personally have a chronic GI problem, so I get infusions every month. They're very expensive. I recognize how much this costs. And even though I've got reasonably good health insurance, the biggest majority of what I pay out in expenses is for health care. And I just don't think that that's fair. And it's mostly for drug prices. There are a number of untruths. There's a number of ads that go out, and I'm sure Mr. Buckland had nothing to do with them. And I mean that sincerely, that Weinstein is a crook and he's making billions of dollars. He runs a drug company. He runs a healthcare agency. It's called he's the head of the AIDS Healthcare Coalition, and he is not making money off of that position. He does have a day job. He makes $400K a year on his day job. That's twice as much as I ever made. Another thing is that there are secret deals. There are no secret deals within the VA. When a new drug comes out, it's FDA approved, it takes the VA 6 to 9, sometimes a year, to determine that it's worthwhile putting on the VA formulary. During that period of time, a veteran may need the medication, and at that time, an individual arrangement is made between a VA and a pharmacy. But that's it. And the only reason that's not mentioned, that's considered secret, is that often it will have the person's name attached with it. So it's not publicized. But those deals are not cheap. Those are list price deals. Thank you.
I'm going to stand here so folks in the back can see as well as hear. Everyone agrees that Ohioans deserve access to affordable prescription drugs, and nobody believes that more than I do. In fact, I've spent a good part of my adult working life in that fight. But I'm opposed to issue 2 because I believe it is bad public policy that would backfire to the detriment of our state and its people. And it's not just me who thinks that. Virtually every expert who has studied issue 2, including a former state budget director and 3 former Ohio Medicaid directors who worked under both Democratic and Republican governors, have said that passing issue 2 will only make the problem of affordable drugs even worse by raising drug costs for a majority of Ohioans and reducing access to needed medicines for some of our most vulnerable citizens. And that's why a coalition of over 70 trusted statewide organizations representing veterans, business, labor, and well over 30,000 Ohio doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and hospitals, including the children's hospitals across the state, are also urging Ohioans to vote no this November. So let me tell you just a few things that are wrong with issue 2, few of the problems. Number 1, it's unworkable. If issue 2 passes, Ohio would be prohibited from paying more than the lowest price for drugs paid by the Veterans Administration, the VA. Now that sounds good, until you realize that we can't know what the VA's lowest price is. What we do know is that the VA gets a federally mandated 24% discount. But that is not the VA's lowest price, because besides that mandated discount, the VA negotiates additional voluntary discounts, and under federal law, those discounts are not publicly disclosed. So if we don't know what those other voluntary discounts are, we can't know what the VA's lowest price is, which means issue 2 would be imposing a requirement that's impossible for the state of Ohio to meet. But even if the VA's lowest price could be known, issue 2 wouldn't lower drug prices for most Ohioans because, as was said before, and this is very important, it only applies to drugs purchased by the state government, which means that issue 2 leaves out everyone who doesn't get their drugs through state programs, which is nearly 2 out of every 3 Ohioans. Let me just stop here and ask for a show of hands. If you have private insurance, If you have insurance provided by your employer or your spouse's employer, if that's how you're covered, if you're a senior citizen who is on Medicare, if you're a veteran who goes to the VA for your medications, or if you have no insurance at all, raise your hand. Everybody in that group, raise your hand. Now, take a look around the room. None of you are included under issue 2. So that means that your costs will not go down, but they could certainly go up thanks to the cost shifting that's almost certain to occur if issue 2 passes. But hey, as Dr. Ruff says, we're all taxpayers, right? So even if virtually nobody in this room is covered by issue 2, wouldn't we all benefit from the $400 million a year that the yes side says issue 2 would save the state? The answer is no, because that alleged $400 million in savings is as phony as the claim that everyone's drug costs are going to go down. Remember, issue 2 only applies to drugs purchased by the state government, and Medicaid drugs, which account for 75% of the drugs the state of Ohio buys, already get a 23.1% federally mandated discount, which is extremely close to the VA's 24% mandated discount. And then, just like the VA, Ohio negotiates additional voluntary discounts and rebates with the drug companies. The bottom line, according to the Medicaid directors, is that Ohio is already negotiating drug prices, and we're already paying close to the VA price for the vast majority of drugs we buy. But if passing issue 2 results in the loss of those voluntary additional discounts, as the Medicaid directors warn might happen, Ohio's drug costs could actually go up by hundreds of millions of dollars a year. But that's not the only thing that's going to cost taxpayers money. There's also issue 2's second paragraph. Now, we have a copy of the initiative back on the back table. I hope you'll all get it. Less than 100 words long. Will not take you long to read. Read the second paragraph. The second paragraph gives issue 2's 4 sponsors, 3 of whom work for the California fellow who is bankrolling the campaign, gives them an unprecedented right to hire their own lawyers and intervene in any legal challenges that might be filed against the initiative if it becomes law. Even worse, it requires Ohio taxpayers to pay the sponsors attorney fees, get this, with no cap or limit, and whether they win or lose. And since nearly everyone agrees that issue 2 would be a magnet for lawsuits, a blank check like that would potentially put Ohio taxpayers on the hook for literally millions of dollars. For all those reasons and more, I urge you to vote no. Issue 2 is nothing less than a prescription for disaster. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Let me just make a couple of responses. The first, how many of you pay taxes? Pretty much all of you. So there is a benefit to you. Now, the points that are made about the VA pricing and the negotiated lower prices. How many years did you work in the VA, Mr. Butler? I don't think you did.
I worked 20 years in the U.S. Senate.
You worked in the Senate, okay. I can tell you that I worked as a national neurology director. We had to work very closely with the pharmacy service. And these so-called negotiated lower prices are baloney. The only individual deals that are cut are for the period of time for individual patients. And those are not big cuts. Those are not what you're talking about. The other thing is a number of people have spoke out against it. I think that my own professional organization, the American Academy of Neurology, probably would have come out against it. Why? Because their publications are full of drug ads. The State Medical Association is full of drug ads. The State Family Physicians Association, which came out in support of issue 2, is not influenced so strongly by pharma. They're really driven by the interests of their patients. There's a lot of money in this system. How many of you saw Forrest Gump? It's a popular movie. There's one scene where Forrest comes back from playing table tennis. And his mother says, "All these companies want you to advertise their products, Forrest. One company left a check for, I'm trying to remember, for $25,000. That's a lot of money, Forrest. Why don't you hold the paddle and see if it feels good in your hands?" People who spoke out against the issue were people who were compensated for their opinions. I purposely do not accept compensation for this because I think that just as power corrupts, money corrupts even worse. And there's too much money in this system. There's too much money that is being pulled out of people's hands, either by what you pay in co-pays or deductibles, or what your health insurance has to pay. That makes it ridiculous. And remember that the United States pays more for all drugs than is true outside the United States. The VA pricing, good as it may be, is, all right, I'll stop. I'll just make one comment, that the comment about the deductions for Medicaid, excuse me, are based on a contingency in the Affordable Care Act, which is very tenuous right now, since Congress is continually trying to attack it. Thank you.
Well, let me just comment on a couple of things that Dr. Ruff said. First of all, he asked how many of you were taxpayers, and you all raised your hands, of course. But remember what I told you before. Now, Dr. Ruff says, oh, those voluntary discounts, you can't trust that. All right, let's leave the voluntary discounts that the state negotiates aside. Let's leave those aside. What Dr. Ruff did not contradict, you'll notice, was what I told you before, which is the central point. The VA gets a 24% federally mandated, that is to say, under law, 24% discount. Medicaid, which accounts for 75% of the drugs Ohio buys, gets a 23.1% federally mandated under law discount. As you can see, that's less than a percentage point difference. Now, does that even pass the straight face test or the common sense test? That you could save $400 million when there's less than a % difference for most of the drugs we buy. Secondly, I want to comment on something Dr. Ruff said. He said, oh, all these people, all these groups that have endorsed on the no side of issue 2, they're all bought by the drug companies. First of all, doctor, I think that's a slur against many of the hardworking doctors and nurses and hospitals in this state. Many people in this room, I'm sure, have doctors and nurses that they see on a regular basis who they believe truly care about their health. The reason these doctors and nurses have come out against this is because they don't believe it'll work, because they believe it's a bad bill. And I would remind you, doctor, that apart from the doctors and the nurses and the pharmacists and the hospitals and the veterans and all the other organizations that have come out against this, every single newspaper in this state that has taken a position thus far has editorialized against issue 2. That would be the Cleveland Plain Dealer, the Columbus Dispatch, the Akron Beacon Journal, the Canton Repository, the Wheeling Intelligencer. We have more to come. When this was on the ballot last year in the state of California, where it went down by 6 points, every single newspaper in the state, including liberal papers like the LA Times and the San Francisco Chronicle, also editorialized against issue 2 and urged people to vote no. Now, did the drug companies buy all the newspaper ed boards too, doctor? I highly doubt it. So, finally, let me just say this. With regard to what he alleges are the untruths in the ads that are being run about Mr. Weinstein. Mr. Weinstein has done some good work. I'm not going to gainsay that. But let's also tell the full truth about Mr. Weinstein. Let's tell the full truth. This is a guy who takes tens of millions of dollars in nonprofit dollars out of this billion-dollar foundation that he runs to run political campaigns all over the country. And right here in Ohio, earlier this year, in March, he didn't get a grant that he wanted to get from the Ohio Department of Health to administer HIV/AIDS drugs. So what did he do? He sued the Ohio Department of Health, and not just that, he filed a restraining order asking that no organization get any money to do HIV/AIDS treatment until his lawsuit was settled. Fortunately, a judge said that's not in the public interest. HIV/AIDS patients need their medications. And that's what I'm trying to say, doctor. This is a man who, when he doesn't get his own way, will sue and doesn't much care who gets hurt, even if it's the very people that his organization exists to serve.
Thank you. There's a lot of interesting questions about this particular. Are there any other questions that are ready to come up while I sort through these? I would like to have everyone thank our two presenters this evening for their efforts. Clearly, this is an issue which has a lot of emotional charge that comes along with it, and I'm trying to figure out a good way to ask some of these questions. Some of them sort of duplicate each other. How would this issue, as presented on the ballot, help a person with private insurance?
It wouldn't. People who have private insurance are not covered under issue 2. Only people who get their drugs through state programs are covered because issue 2 only applies to drugs purchased by the state government.
Correct. A person with private insurance would not be helped by this issue, wouldn't be hurt by this issue in terms of what you pay for drugs. Our point, which is contested by Mr. Butland, is that if the state pays less for the medications that they are responsible for purchasing, that it will mean that the state can operate at a lower budget, and hence your taxes may end up being lower or not rise as much.
Yeah, so I don't concede that. And what I will tell you is people who have private insurance will not see their drug costs get lower, but they could very well see them get higher, and here's why. If you tell a company, whether that company makes drugs or automobiles or television sets, that they have to sell their product to a certain segment of the population at the below market rate, what happens to prices for everybody who is not covered by that edict, right? Prices go. Cost shifting is not some nefarious scheme that's been cooked up by as the other side would have it, the greedy pharmaceutical companies. It's basic economics. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Somebody always pays. And in this case, it would be people who have private insurance would be the payers.
Aren't you tired of paying for that? I mean, what Mr. Butland is saying is that, oh, it's fine for us to pay more than Europe. It's fine for us to pay more than Africa. It's fine for us to pay more than South America, Central America, Asia. Why the hell do the American citizens have to bear the greedy, as you put it, of the pharmacy companies? If we don't start, all right, I'll stop.
Mr. Butler never said anything about it being okay to pay more than these foreign companies. Let me just finish the point, please. Mr. Butler never said anything about it's okay for us to pay more than Europe. Issue 2 has nothing to do with that. Issue 2 has nothing to do with what we pay versus Europe versus Asia versus all the other countries in the world. The problem is we have a national problem that requires a national solution. You cannot fix the problem of affordable prescription drugs on a piecemeal, state-by-state basis, or you wind up with something like issue 2, which is a complete mess.
Okay, thank you. Let's take a moment to breathe a little bit. The questions here reflect how interested people are in this issue. Why are we not dealing directly with pharmaceutical companies and their drug pricing through legislation rather than through this ballot initiative? You first.
I'm not sure. Would you
Okay.
repeat the first part?
Okay. Why are we not dealing directly with the pharmaceutical companies through legislation rather than with this issue?
I'm not sure that I understand the question entirely, but if the question is, why don't we pass a law in Ohio that restricts what drugs can be sold for by pharmaceutical companies, is that the question? But what I can tell you is that if such a law were going to be passed, it would have to be passed by the federal government. That's not something that a state can do, for pretty obvious reasons, I think. But I think you would find it very difficult to pass a federal law telling any private company, whether, again, no matter what they make, I think you'd find it very difficult to get something through the Congress that said that companies can only sell a television set for this amount of money, or drugs for that amount of money, or anything for any amount of money. That's not the kind of system we have. I do think there are some things that can be done, and Sherrod Brown has been doing some very interesting things, and I understand he's getting some bipartisan traction on it. And I think that's where we ought to be focusing our efforts, is at the federal level, because we do have a federal problem.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to add that that's exactly the point. The point is that it's not going to occur on a federal level first. It has to occur on a small level first to work up. The reason that pharma is so strongly against this action is that if this passes, it would be a start. It would be a start of what would be perceived as a slippery slope. Suddenly everybody else would be demanding that we get prices similar to what they pay in the rest of the world. Is that not fair? I think it is.
Okay, thank you. Is there an equity component in this bill that would reduce the treatment care costs along with drug expenses?
No.
No, okay,
And I have no disagreement with that response.
okay. Can either of you explain how complicated the National Acquisition Center and the Contract Catalog Search Trial, the VA pricing schedule mechanism is? Is the issue too simplistic? The legislation which is proposed here, is it too simplistic to deal with the complex issue at question?
No.
I think that it is workable. I mean, obviously my opponent does not. The VA comes up with drug prices, able to negotiate drug prices because it's negotiating as a large healthcare system. There are over 150 VA medical centers and several thousand VA outpatient clinics. That negotiating ability is what enables them to have the leveraging power to get lower prices. There's no other such system in the United States. Medicare is specifically prohibited from negotiating drug prices.
Okay.
So, do I get a chance?
Have you spoken yet?
No.
No, speak. Sorry.
So here's another, the question is very well taken. Isn't this a simplistic answer? And yes, the answer is yes, it is. Here's another example of why this is unworkable, beyond the fact that we can't know what the lowest price is that the VA pays. It makes no allowance for the distribution costs that Ohio incurs, but which the VA doesn't. As the doctor well knows, the way the VA buys drugs and distributes them and the way Ohio does are two very different things. The VA buys drugs in mass quantities, stores them in huge warehouses. They actually take possession of the drugs, store them in huge warehouses, and then they distribute them through clinics and through a mail order program that the VA itself runs. In Ohio, we don't own pharmacies. We don't do things like that. If you're on Medicaid, it works the same way a private insurance does. You go to your doctor, you get a script, you go to your pharmacy, you get your prescription filled. The state then reimburses the pharmacist, okay? But included in that reimbursement is a dispensing fee, without which the pharmacist could not stay in business. There was no allowance made for that dispensing fee. You could only pay what was the lowest price paid by the VA for the drug itself. So you'd have pharmacists losing money on every prescription that they fill.
I think that it demonstrates how complex this present situation is. I have 3 cards here which are variations on this question. Many voters believe that the pharmaceutical industry has been overpriced for decades. What can we do to bring prices down rather than going to Canada? If this doesn't regulate the prices, is it not a good first step? And what can we do to stop people from ripping off sick people? So I guess the question basically is this a good first step, or is something else needed? And if so, what might that be?
If the experts are right and passing issue 2 ends up increasing drug costs for a majority of Ohioans and reducing access to needed medicines for some of our most vulnerable people, I think we can all corporately agree that that would not be a good first step. Now, I get the fact that people are angry at the pharmaceutical companies. I get the fact that people are angry about high drug prices. But folks, no matter what you think about the drug companies or the prices they charge or the benefits they pay themselves, the salaries they pay themselves, none of that is on the ballot this fall in the state of Ohio. What is on the ballot is a very specific piece of legislation that every expert who has looked at it says will do very bad things for our state and its people. So I urge you to get the facts before you cast your vote, and do not vote in anger. The other side wants you to say, ignore the doctors, ignore the experts, ignore the newspaper editorials, vote your anger. President Kennedy reminded us that those foolish enough to ride the tiger usually end up inside him.
So first point, not all physicians are opposed to this. Large organizations which get money from pharma are in opposition. The whole medical industrial complex, which we are dealing with in this country, runs on, I'll wash your back, you wash my back. So the big healthcare systems are not going to be against it, or not going to be in favor, because they're making a lot of money now. They don't want to rock the boat. The individual doctors, the family physicians who are in favor of this, recognize that the people are the ones bearing the burden of this. I think it's a good first step. It's certainly not complete. It's not the total answer, but it's going out of control. It's getting crazy. When I was a kid, I never saw drugs advertised on television. I never saw so many ads for very expensive medications.
Okay, thank you. Are either one of you being compensated for going out to speak on issue 2? And if so, by whom or what organization?
So, I can answer very clearly, no. I'm not being paid directly or indirectly. I'm very clear about that. The work I do for the Myasthenia Gravis Foundation is purely voluntary. We pay to go to their meetings. We pay for the hotel. We don't accept money from them. I don't accept money for travel costs back and forth. I don't think that's fair. I didn't become a doctor to become a businessman. I didn't become rich, but I can look my kids in the face and not be ashamed of myself. That's what's important to me.
The question was, am I getting paid to come out and give talks like this? The answer is no, I'm not getting paid to come out and give talks like this. I am getting paid. I'm the communications director for Ohioans Against the Deceptive RX Ballot issue. So in other words, I'm a paid employee of the campaign. So yes, I am getting paid. As to who is behind issue 2, or the no side, I should say. As I say, we have a coalition of 70 different organizations representing business, labor, 30,000 doctors, hospitals, pharmacists, and so forth. Every veterans organization in the state.
No, that's not true. The Paralyzed Veterans of America are not.
They are not an Ohio organization, sir. Every
Our chapter is an Ohio organization.
Every statewide organization, veterans organization, that would include the American Legion, that would include the VFW, that would include the Military Order of the Purple Heart, the Korean War veterans, the Vietnam War veterans, the Afghanistan War veterans, and so on.
Those are national organizations as well as the PDA.
They are in Ohio, sir. Those are all the Ohio.
And so is the Buckeye chapter of the PDA.
Stop, please, thank you. Okay. I think I'll use for our final question, it's more of a philosophical one. Where is the bill to give senior citizens free health care and prescription drugs, and how would it be paid for? This is not the topic of the bill, but I think it's worth considering at this time, since this affects health care.
I'm sorry.
How do you give senior citizens free prescriptions and health care? This is not the subject of this issue, but it's philosophical. Maybe we can think of something to bring us up a little from the...
Yeah, so I'm here to speak on behalf and to speak to issue 2. Giving senior citizens free health care, admirable as that might be, that will not be on the ballot this fall in the state of Ohio. I'm here to talk about what will be on the ballot that you'll be voting on this fall.
Okay, thank you.
I would actually agree with what Mr. Buckland said. I would just put a slightly different spin on it. I think that this is my personal opinion, not with issue 2. I think until we come up with a single payer system, that we are going to be trees in an orchard. We're going to be pruned and picked by the healthcare system. Patients are not the customer in the system. The customer in the system are the payers, the insurance companies, the national Medicare systems. You are the mechanisms by which that pay occurs. And unfortunately, the healthcare system is designed right now to sustain you, not to cure you. And if you think about the treatments that come out, except for very few, most of those are sustaining, and the few cures that exist are incredibly expensive, such as Harvoni for hepatitis C.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to have our audience thank our speakers. This is a very difficult and contentious topic they have to cover. And if they are available to stick around after the meeting for a little bit and answer further questions that you have, by all means take them as they leave the building. I would like to remind